All right, it seems like we are ready to begin, so welcome everybody. My name is Tema Smith. I am on the New Israel Fund of Canada's board, and after 2.5 years online, it's just such a thrill to be resuming in-person events with all of you. I want to begin today by acknowledging the lands on which we are grateful to be living, working, and coming together in learning today, and the people who were here caring for this land and its inhabitants before the arrival of the first settlers from Europe. We acknowledge that we here in Toronto are hosted on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Ojibwe and Chippewa, the Huron-Wendat peoples, under the Dish with One Spoon and Two-Row Wampum Belt Covenant. Many Indigenous nations agreed to peaceably share and care for the land and welcomed others to do the same. We also acknowledge today that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, while understanding that the signatories to that treaty, as with many treaties across this country, were not in equal positions of power, and that treaties have actually contributed to the problematic history of settlement that we are challenged today to confront. It's also important to remember the ongoing presence of many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people from across Turtle Island who call this land and the city of Toronto home today. In Pirkei Avot, a seminal text of Jewish ethics, we read the words of Rabbi Tarfon, Lo alecha hamlecha ligmor, velo ata ben chorin lihipatal mimena. You are not required to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. As we gather here today to hear about what is happening in a land overseas that we share a connection to, I want to take this moment to ground us here in the land that we inhabit together today and bring us together in commitment to truth and reconciliation in pursuit of justice for all. And with that, I want to introduce some of you or remind others of you about the New Israel Fund of Canada. Some here might be attending a New Israel Fund of Canada event for the first time, and welcome. The New Israel Fund of Canada educates Canadians about and funds projects in Israel that make Israel a better, more equal, and more democratic society. Since 1986, New Israel Fund of Canada has contributed over $10 million to more than 100 organizations that fight for socioeconomic equality, religious freedom, civil and human rights, shared society and anti-racism, Palestinian citizens, and democracy itself. We work closely with the global New Israel Fund family with branches in the US, the UK, Australia, Germany, Switzerland, and others. In the words of one of Israel's largest daily papers, Haaretz, there is hardly any significant socially oriented organization in Israel today that does not in some way owe its existence to the New Israel Fund. So why did I decide to get more involved with New Israel Fund of Canada? I personally have always been very committed to a just solution to Israel-Palestine that recognizes and secures Israel's right to exist and self-determination for Palestinians. When I returned from Israel in 2008, after a year in graduate school, I was looking for ways to continue my commitment to Israeli democracy and a two-state solution in a Jewish context, and a place where I could talk about the challenges I was having with the facts on the ground in Israel. When I finally stumbled upon the New Israel Fund, I found a place where I could meet like-minded people dedicated to ensuring Israel's future as a democratic state committed to its founding values of freedom, justice, peace, and equality for all its inhabitants. Our guest speakers today exemplify the kind of Israelis that I am proud to support. To introduce you to them, I'd like to welcome Ben Murane, our executive director, who will moderate today's conversation.
Thank you, Tema. Toronto is very lucky to have you, Tema, and we are very lucky to have you on our board of directors and been involved for many years before that, so thank you. Hello, everyone. It is so nice to see so many of you in person after many months, years away from each other. This is really a delight. Thank you for being willing to come out today. And I know there were many others who wanted to come out and join us, but we're just not ready to do so. We have been on this is the third stop of a 4-city tour with these two speakers. We've just been in Montreal, we've just been in Ottawa. We're doing this today, and tomorrow we're on our way to Vancouver, assuming that all the flights don't cancel on us. So we've been on a variety of planes, trains, and automobiles the past few days, and usually they work out fine. So we'll see. I know many of you are really familiar with the New Israel Fund, and I know that there's a few people in the room who are new. But I do want to say that how wonderful it is to see so many people who are in our leadership, have been in our leadership, are joining our leadership. I think the past 2 years has been a really interesting period of incubation, and this 4-city tour that we're on, I think, is coming out of the cocoon, if I can say, a commitment to an increased, expanded amount of work that we're doing, not just in Toronto, but across the country. And one of the ideas behind, what are we here to talk about today? I want you to remember a year ago in May, when it was not such a happy time. I want you to remember the moments when the tit-for-tat violence in Jerusalem and other places in Israel had escalated, and it kept escalating, and it kept escalating. And then there were rockets falling from Gaza onto Israel, and there were rockets from Israel falling onto Gaza. And in those moments, it was already bad enough. But then we saw something that we really hoped that we wouldn't really ever have to see, which was Israeli citizens went after Israeli citizens. We saw Jewish citizens attack Arab citizens. We saw Arab citizens attack Jewish citizens. And in that moment, I think those were the headlines that were the easiest to see. I know that many of you follow the news closely, and that in those moments is the easiest to feel hopeless, to feel despair, to feel like you don't know what there is to do with those feelings. And now I know many of you also are very close followers of the New Israel Fund, so you know, but others may not know, that there was also, in that moment, that nadir of the recent conflict, a really powerful pushback, a really powerful response to the violence that we had not seen. NIF has been doing this work for 40 years. And it's interesting to hear people who've been professionals and been leaders of civil society for 10, 20, 30, 40 years say, we did not see in, say, the second intifada or the first intifada, the kind of incredible, inspiring pushback that we saw last May and last June. And we certainly never saw what we have had the past year, a government in Israel which has included a Palestinian political party. Now, part of what we're doing today is we're going to unpack, what has been that year and what happened last May and what can be done specifically for improvement of relations between Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel. What can be done? What is possible under this new government? But before we get into that, I also want to say the reason that these two speakers are here on the stage is also because of the work that we did in May when the situation seemed the darkest. New Israel Fund's job is to fund and train Israeli civil society to do the hard work of improving equality and democracy in Israel. And in that moment, around the world, the New Israel Fund launched a shared society emergency fund, and it raised over $1 million for new investments in Jewish-Arab shared society. And some of that was immediate work, and some of it was medium-term work, and some of it was long-term work. And the work of Jewish and Palestinian shared society in Israel touches on a number of themes that we wanted to raise for you. So that's why we've brought the two of them to speak with you. In the most, those darkest moments, what did we see? 50 roadside gatherings and in town squares across Israel of Jews and Arabs who had never seen each other before, never met each other, but responded to the moment to say, hold signs and placards on street corners and say, Jews and Arabs refuse to be enemies. That had not happened previously. And it happened because there were organizations that had been ready to do so. There had been new leadership trained. In those moments, we also saw as New Israel Fund launched the application process for new invitations from the field for Jewish and Arab shared projects, that normally that kind of call would get, within a year, 200 projects. 600 applications from institutions, municipalities, and individuals, families, corners of Israel that had never before ever applied, who had never volunteered themselves as some sort of advocate for Jewish-Arab equality in Israel. That was massive, just to see the sort of grassroots response in this moment of need. Yes, there was violence on the streets, but also there was something else happening. And on top of that, as we've seen in the past, Israel has had 4 elections in 2 years. Even though at the surface level they deadlocked every single time, what we saw beneath the polls was each time the percent of the public that was willing to give it a shot of a Palestinian Arab participation in government as an official member of the coalition inched from the minority into the majority. Now we'll talk tonight, like it could fall tomorrow, and what would be the consequences of that? But the point of all of this is to say that something is happening in Israel, and things do feel gloomy, especially in those moments. But that is the reason that you, I hope, are all here, because you believe, as we do, that Israel has within it what it needs to turn itself around, but that it can't do it alone. It's a partnership. It needs us, and we need it. So with that, I want to turn to our speakers, briefly introduce them. This is how tonight's going to work. Each of them, we'll ask a number of questions, and then we will take some Q&A. And I hope that we'll wrap up by 4:30. So on my right, is this my right? Is it weird to find yourself on the right? This is Dafna Saporta. Dafna represents Bimkom. She was one of their very first employees. She now heads their department in the Bedouin, with the Bedouin in the Negev. I'll leave her to talk about Bimkom and the work that she does. But Dafna, it's been a really incredible past few days where we've got to see you unpack all of your work and represent a very different strategy and a very different response to what Israel's needs than Gadi here on my left. Dr. Gadi Gvaryahu is the founder of Tag Meir, a 50 organization coalition in Israel that includes the Reform movement, the Masorti movement, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Palestinians, secular as well. That respond in real time, live, within less than 24 hours to incidences of hate crimes or terrorism against anyone. And I'll let Gadi unpack that as well. But I wanted to say it's been such a pleasure to hear you tell your stories, and I'm really excited that we're doing this today in Toronto and that we'll do it tomorrow in Vancouver. Fingers crossed. But first, why don't we just have you guys introduce yourselves for our audience? So, Dafna, would you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you landed in this work?
Okay. So hello, everybody. My name is Dafna Saporta. I'm an architect, and I'm working last 25 years in the field of planning. I'm married to Arik, and we have 4 children. I want to thank the New Israeli Fund of Canada for many years of supporting Bimkom, and I'm very excited being here, so thank you for inviting me. So I grew in Jerusalem to a very secular, liberal, Zionist family. And my family are 9 generations in Israel, and it's a long time. My parents were very active in promoting human rights when I was little, so I grew in this kind of environment. They were following the 1967 war. They were fighting also against the establishment of the Jewish settlements in the West Bank. And actually, my father, Yoel, is 81 today. He's continuing to volunteer in a human rights organization. But although I grew in this very liberal family, there were no Arabs around us, not at all. It's totally separate life, and the only Arabs I knew were the ones who cleaned the streets, the staircase, the builders. This is the only ones I knew. I was 34 when I first met Arabs in a daily and equal way. When I decided to send my children to the hand-in-hand school, the Jewish Arabs integrated school in Israel. It was really kind of a natural step, and I think one of the best decisions we made in our life. I can say that. Very complicated, but it was very very significant. My children, Alma and Michael, who is 20 and today, are really, were in this environment, studied Arabic from the age of 6, and they speak fluently. They have, for them it's a total different way of growing up as I grew. And I think I remember a moment that is really inside me when Alma, my daughter, was 10. We were in this store in Israel buying something, and this Palestinian woman dressed traditionally came in and asked for something in Arabic. She didn't know Hebrew, and the seller in the store didn't understand what she said, and she lost her patience and started in a very rude way to tell her, go out, with these hand gestures, just go out. And I remember I felt really embarrassed and very sad that I couldn't help her. I don't know Arabic. I'm learning, but I don't know. And that's just then my daughter, who was 10, approached this Palestinian woman and asked her if she wants her to translate her. And she translated her and to the woman, and she bought what she wanted. And I remember really standing there with tears in my eyes, and very proud of my daughter, but also shocked how this everyday situation really expresses the segregated life we live in Israel, in the city, in the country. It's not just segregated, it's also very unequal, and Palestinians suffer from discrimination and less access to infrastructures and resources than we do. So hand in hand really became a community for us, a way of life, a place to feel belong, and above all, it really taught me that in my small world, I can influence and make a difference. And this led me to Bimkom. I found a job in 2012. I was the first worker in 1999, the first worker, but then I left when my kids were born. I came back in 2012. And I started working in the East Jerusalem department. 3 years later, in 2015, we opened our first playground in one of the Palestinian neighborhoods in East Jerusalem called Sur Bachel. I don't know if you know that name. But it's one of the 3 playgrounds that we in Bimkom opened together with the community. This is very, very important to say. I remember there, you have to understand, first of all, that even though there are 40% Palestinians in Jerusalem who live today from the total population, there are only less than 20 playgrounds in all the Palestinian neighborhoods. Less than 20, I mean, compared to the West Jerusalem, which you can't compare. It's hundreds or maybe thousands, I think. So this was a really big event. And I remember standing there and really, seeing the children on the slides, on the swings, and feeling joy and self-fulfillment. And I felt that this is the job I want to do. Really use my skills to help together with the community, the disadvantaged communities, to promote better life. And today I'm leading the Negev department. It's a different department. I'm working with the Bedouins in promoting promoting recognition for the unrecognized villages. I'll talk about it later. And also promoting, more respectful planning for the Bedouins. So that's all. Oh.
On the other side, Gadi, I didn't even mention that like, if one had to describe a serial social entrepreneur out of Israel, this is what it looks like. Because Gadi has founded not one school, but 2 schools, plus a synagogue, plus Tag Meir, plus another organization that deals with the memory of Yitzhak Rabin from within the modern Orthodox community. So do you want to tell a little bit more about, like, how did you do all of those things? Like, where do you come from in Israel that you built?
Okay, thank you, Ben. My name is Gadi Gvaryahu. I'm the chairman of Tag Meir. I was born in Jerusalem, actually 8 generations in Jerusalem from my mother's side. And so my grandchildren in Jerusalem are 10 generations in Jerusalem. And from my father's side, I'm a 2nd generation Holocaust survivor. Very important thing is that my mother-in-law was born in Winnipeg. So that's my Canadian connection. As you can see from my kippah, I belong to the religious Zionist sector, and not all of them are extreme, not all of them are right-wing. You'll be surprised to know that the founders of Breaking the Silence were religious Zionists. The people that started the Sheikh Jarrah movement also were religious Zionists. And my son, Avner, is the general director of Breaking the Silence. And he received good education. So don't give up on anyone. People from religious and even ultra-Orthodox people can be part of this peace movement and all the good things that we believe in the New Israel Fund. I want to thank the New Israel Fund. Ben mentioned all the things that we did beside Tag Meir, which I will talk about, but we started liberal, pluralistic schools in Jerusalem, in Israel, in Rehovot, in Yerucham, in Zichron Yaakov, and none of them would be started and established without New Israel Fund. Also, Tag Meir. So for me, the turn point was Yitzhak Rabin assassination. The fact that religious Orthodox person decided to get rid of our president, our prime minister. And someone told him from heaven that to do that, for me, that was the turning point. That was the when I decided that I cannot just sit down and watch television and read newspaper and not to do anything. I did a few things before, but not on a national level. Ben mentioned that we started a synagogue in Rehovot named after Yitzhak Rabin, and it's not obvious even today. Synagogue named after Yitzhak Rabin. When we started our synagogue, people laugh and say, "Do you have a minyan?" We had close to 90 families, and Naftali Bennett, before he became famous and prime minister, came to our synagogue when he visited Rehovot. It was important for him. And 5 times we, in doing memorial services and the festivals and Yom Kippur, we pray for Yitzhak Rabin that were murdered by an evil Jew. Just like that in Hebrew. So the synagogue, then we started a movement called 12 Cheshvan. 12 Cheshvan, that's the Yortzeit of Yitzhak Rabin in Hebrew, Memorial Day. It was Saturday night, 12 Cheshvan. And that movement on 2008 helped us to create all those liberal schools that religious girls serve in the army. And now we have 5 schools, 4 schools for girls and 1 for boys, like that, and the impact is enormous. Tag Meir. We started Tag Meir because on the summer of 2009, 2 extreme rabbis from extreme settlement named Itzhar printed a book, published a book called in Hebrew Torat HaMelech, King's Law. It's 250-page book, describe in details if and how and when you can kill people that are not Jewish. 4 famous rabbis, not just people that you don't know their names, gave the support to that book. So I mentioned turn points. That was another turn point. That really push us to start Tag Meir. So we claim when they published that book that it's a guidebook for terrorists, Jewish terrorists. Now they have approval from rabbis to do horrible things to Palestinians.
And Gadi, it's worth mentioning, these rabbis you mentioned, they get a salary from the government.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We wrote letters to the Attorney General, to the Ministry of Justice. We went all the way to the Supreme Court. So we had 3 judges, 1 Arab and 2 Jewish people. Of course, the Arab judge were in favor of our appeal, but the 2 Jewish, the majority, refused to do anything to the book. They said that's part of freedom of speech. And unfortunately, we were right, because the book was published in the summer of 2009. December 2009, Jewish terrorists burned the first mosque, and they wrote price tag on the wall of that mosque. Price tag mean you Palestinian will pay the price for something that you did to us, or the government, the Israeli government, did to us. If the Israeli government, the army knocked down illegal settlement, you'll pay the price for that. And we will burn the mosque. By the way, not just the mosque, just can be also church or monastery. And I think that's enough for me.
Well, why don't we get into, like, since we began, why don't we get into, like, so something terrible happens. What do you do?
Sure. When we started Tag Meir, we were like few organizations. We felt that we cannot do it by ourselves. We need more people, more organizations. So now we have 50 organizations, close to 50 in Tag Meir. Like Ben mentioned, it's including reform movement, conservative movement, and also synagogues all over, Israel youth movement. Shomer HaTzair is part of Tag Meir, for instance. The way we work, beside having boards that represent all those movements, we have WhatsApp groups all over the country. So something happened in the Galil, we just called people from Tag Meir Tzafon, Tag Meir North, we call it. Please, something happened, a mosque destruct, or someone, or a bus driver just was beaten, or he's in a hospital in Tzfat. We need to visit him. So our volunteers will go to Tzfat to visit this bus driver with flour, chocolate. And we have Tag Meir Darom, Tag Meir South. We have Tag Meir Tel Aviv and Tag Meir Jerusalem. And that's, of course, we have a Facebook page with 60,000 followers. And I'm going back to Israel this week. On Wednesday next week, we'll visit a small village between two big cities, Palestinian village, between two relatively big cities compared to this small village. It's called Wadi Pruchin, between Tzur Hadassah and Beitar Illit. And the Palestinians there, they have their agriculture field, vegetables, and they suffer a lot on almost on a weekly basis. So we will visit them with hopefully at least 50 of our volunteers, 2 buses. We plan to come with money to give them for what happened to them in the last few months. And this is how we work in Tag Meir. I'll go into give you more examples and what we are doing later on.
So what you see here is 2 very different strategies. We have something over here which is immediate rapid response. You know, it's people to people. It's in the moment. What did you tell me, Gadi? If it's less than 24 hours, there's almost no point. And it's like a volunteer structure that reaches now like 200 people on those WhatsApp groups, like rapidly responding in live time. And over here we have working with the establishments, working with the bureaucracy, and everyone who's been to Israel knows, that's terrifying enough. You're absolutely among the bravest people in Israel to take on the bureaucrats. But I want you to would you get in a little bit more to what are you working on now, and
who are we?
Yeah, help us understand what Bimkom was founded to do and what it does.
Okay, so Bimkom, Planners for Planning Rights, is an Israeli civil society organization. Was established in 1999 by a group of professionals and planners and architects with the goal of strengthening the connection between human rights, democracy, and planning, or in the planning system in Israel and also in parts of that Israel control. So we assist communities in the West Bank, but also in East Jerusalem, Arab communities in the north and in mixed cities, which is very relevant the past year, and my department in the Negev with the Bedouins. To understand it, maybe just imagine your street. Is the sidewalk wide enough that you can walk with your grandchildren, with your children safely? Is there a school nearby, a preschool? Is there a playground? Is there basic infrastructures? Do you have water or sewage system? Do you have electricity? Do you have paved roads? I guess the answer to that is is yes. So these are really the questions that we as planners ask. Because planning is a part of our life. It really shapes the area in which we live. In the area, the basic things is planning. And planning policies really regulate our access to housing, to health, to education, to industrial and employment areas, and as well as to basic infrastructures like water, sewage, and electricity. But in disadvantaged communities all around Israel, there's none of this because there's no planning. And if there is planning, it doesn't meet the needs of the local communities. So the plans only stay on paper. You can't implement them. Like for instance, in the village of Bir el-Hamam, it's just one example of many others, but in Bir el-Hamam, there's pictures here, but you can maybe later on see. Children don't go to school whenever it rains because the unpaved roads are flooded with water. Young children don't go to preschools because there's doesn't exist one nearby. So women also stay at home because of that. Even though in many communities women want to go to work, want to get out of the house, they can't because what would they do with the children? The young generation who wants to get married can't move in their own house because there's no plan that they can do it. So they stay living in crowded houses with their parents. No playgrounds, no parks, nothing. And this is a situation in the unrecognized villages and the recognized villages. I'll talk about it later, the difference. So our goal is actually promoting planning and recognition to these places so it will improve the life of the communities there. And we have two strategies. I won't get into it, but in a simple way, I'll say that we work from top to bottom and bottom up. Top to bottom is working with, like Ben mentioned, with the decision makers, members of the government, planning, the planning in the planning systems. We initiate together with the community meetings inside the offices. Also, we bring them to the communities to meet them. We submit objections, petitions, professional reports, like I'll show you later. This is things that we do to like top to bottom, but it's always with a full cooperation with the communities. We never do it by ourselves because Bimkom think this is what it should be. It's also in partnership. It's always in partnership with the communities. This is very, very important to say. And the other strategy is the bottom up, which we work really with grassroots level, with cooperation with the communities, and this is. First of all, there's such a lack of trust between Bedouins and the state. So first of all, we build this trust with the communities. We meet with different groups, women. It's not simple, but we always do the effort to meet with women, with students, with men, with old people, just to understand what their needs, what their dreams are, how do they look, how do they see their future, how do they see their village, and we combine this with the professional knowledge of that we have as planners, and formulate like a document, which gives a planning perspective of proposing how to plan this village. How to recognize it in place and not displace the people like the government's policy. This is really long-term processes. It could take decades and even more. We have a community in Wadi Nam which we work since we were established actually, since 2000. And we're still working with them. So we move with these communities through many challenges, many opportunities also. It's not just, it's not just bad, but also there's many opportunities on the way. And we really, we move together through this. And I think this is mainly.
In brief.
In brief.
On Friday, Dafna gave a special, more in-depth briefing for a group of architects, urban planners, real estate developments, and rather than have sharing an hour and a half together, she had the whole hour and a half to herself. So this is really just the surface. But perhaps we can dive into an example that will make this a little bit more understandable, and then we'll do the same for Gadi. earlier this year, I think you said it was back in January, many of us saw headlines that there were significantly large Bedouin protests in the Negev, and that the JNF was involved. It was something about a tree forest being planted that really outraged the Bedouin community, and that the clashes, the police dispersals of those protests turned particularly violent. So, I mean, many people here, I think, are aware that we're sponsoring, the New Israel Fund of Canada is sponsoring a film at the Toronto Film Festival right now called Blue Box, which is also about the JNF and its role in Israel in land planning issues. So as perhaps as maybe not common land planning conversations are, it's actually seeing something of a moment here. So can you just tell us, like, you were there, you saw it, can you tell us what was that about? What was happening? What did you see?
Okay. So did you hear about this event in January 2022? It was really in the headlines, which is also something that doesn't happen often. You hear about Bedouin issues in Israel, I'm talking about. So in January 2022, the JNF workers came inside the private lands of a family called El Atrash, who lives on their private historical land, and started to plant these really meaningless, ridiculous, I can say, plants in the middle of the desert, but in the middle of a very significant area called the Beersheba Valley, which is actually home to 30,000 Bedouin residents. It's the middle of the settlements of the Bedouins in the Negev. I'll talk about it later on. What is this? But this is really, the most of the unrecognized villages are there. There are about 6 villages, very big one. And the people live there next to many cultivated land, which provide the livelihood for their families. They're agricultural lands. I mean, they live on this land. So just imagine now, the JNF workers, no advance ahead, came into this El Atrash family private lands with hundreds, if not more, armed policemen and enforcement units. And Israel is very good in this enforcement units. Really thousands, hundreds, okay? I don't know if thousands, but it looked like thousands. Going into this land of the El Atrash family and starting to replow the cultivated land, to destroy the land, and planting these forests, the plants. I don't have a picture of it but it's really, I saw it in my eyes, and it's really, really, really ridiculous to see this, how this plants, in the middle of nowhere, no meaning. So the protest just came, and it really escalated into clashes. You heard about them. It was very, very powerful, and I think this was the event. I think it's understand to hear how this came to, but maybe you want me to continue, or maybe
go ahead.
So, actually, to understand how this came up to, I have to connect in my answer 3 issues. So you can understand more, okay? The first of all is the formulating, you say, of the unrecognized villages. What is this thing that I'm talking about? The second thing is the issue on the land claim, the land issue, the land ownership of the Bedouin. And the third thing is the role of the JNF in all this land struggle. So first of all, I want to do a background very shortly. 1948, when Israel was established, there was a military regime, and all the Bedouins who lived in this Negev, you see the purple? You can't see it really, but just this purple. This is 13 million dunams in the Negev. They were living there, 90,000 Bedouins were living all over. So the state, under this military regime, just moved the Bedouin to a very, restricted area in the northeast part of the Negev, which they live actually until today. Non-Bedouins, actually a little bit were left in the south and in the west part, but not a lot, okay? They were moved there, and From 1963 to 2000, Israel established 7 townships. I don't know if you heard about the name Rahat, Chura, Tel Sheva. These are the big townships. There are 7 like this, and half of the population were moved into this township, displaced from their homes to these townships that are, until today, are on the bottom of the social economical ladder in Israel. Really the most poorest environment you can imagine. There they live. And this is really like a testimony to the failure of the planning policy, because they were moved there against their tradition, against their culture, against their way of life. And this is how, this is what it's now. That the second half remained in 46 villages which were not recognized by the state. So today, from 2000, Israelis started to recognize these 46 villages, 17 until now. 4 of them were actually recognized just recently, April, May. I don't know if you heard in the news, but they were recognized. 4 of them were recognized just recently, but there's more to go. So today, there's 280 Bedouins living in the Negev. Half of them live in the townships, half of them live in the villages. 100,000 people live in unrecognized villages today. No basic infrastructures, like I said before, nothing. And I will add to this that they have no local government who represent them. So they're totally actually visible. People who don't, invisible. I always get mixed up with this word, transparent, visible. Invisible, thank you. So this is a situation. The situation in the recognized villages, 17, but those who were recognized 20 years ago, they have plans, they have boundaries, but it's only on paper. So the situation is actually quite the same, because the plans didn't meet the needs of the people. I admit that this has changed. And the past 5 years, this is changing, and I'll talk about it later. So now I'm getting to the second issue, which is the issue on the land, okay? The Bedouin are living on this is, as I said, 13 million dunams is all this region of the Beersheba district, which is, you see, it doesn't have a lot of settlements there. It has 150 Jewish settlements that there is kibbutzim, moshavim, all kinds of townships, big towns, small towns, community towns, farms, but they're all Jewish. And Bedouins only have here 17, about 24, okay? But they're a third of the population in the Beersheba district. So the Bedouin sits today on 3% of this Beersheba district. Only 3%, that's all. If the state would have recognized their rights and their rights on their land, they will sit on only 5% of all this 13 million dunams, only 5%. So whenever you hear people, I hear it every day, my friends, everybody say, wherever I go to the Negev, I always see Bedouin around. Everywhere you look on every hill, there's Bedouins, they're everywhere. But actually the fact is that they're only sitting on 3% of all this land. The conflict is on 2% of it. The Bedouin says it's mine. The state says it's mine. This is very simple, okay? So JNF has a very, very significant role in this land struggle, because they plant their trees actually to block the development of the Bedouin settlements in the Negev. They're totally, they work with no visibility at all, bypassing transparency. They bypass all the planning routes. You don't know about their plans. You don't know nothing. We don't know nothing about them. They work in a very transparency way, untransparency way, non-transparency way. So we as planners actually can't deal with this. It's very hard for us to deal with them, with this JNF.
And I think let's just clarify really quickly.
Yeah.
Like this is the JNF Kakal,
yes.
Karen Kayemet LeYisrael. This is the quasi-governmental body, and because it's like technically its own independent organization, it doesn't have the governmental requirements for transparency that like any other government would.
They work.
But this is not it's like related, but not the same entity as say JNF Canada, JNF US. That part is also intransparent, and we don't really know the depth of like diaspora charity dollars in this work, but we can suspect a lot. Sorry.
No, but okay, so I said that it's very hard to deal with them. You can understand why. But we believe that the solution is planning. I mean, if you remember this significant Beersheba Valley I talked in the beginning, where the Atrash family, where all the protests were. So we believe that if this area was planned, there were boundaries for villages, places for industrial and education. Maybe there would have been left places for these forests. I'm telling you that not, because I know it's 90% private area, private land. But if it was planned, maybe this problem, we wouldn't have this problem. 7 months before this JNF plantings in January, there was a new government. We had our party, Ra'am, inside this government. We all felt like this is a new horizon for us, that this is an opportunity to promote planning, proper planning and recognition for these villages in this area, in the Beersheba Valley. So there was the Bedouins, the residents also, I mean, we felt this together, and they established a united council of representatives from all these villages to start, promoting their issues. And we started working with them, and it was very complicated because there's a lot of conflicts between the different communities in this area. But we did it. We formulated together a very basic document which gives a planning perspective of the area. It shows the boundaries of the village, agreed by the leadership, of course, places for the schools, for industrial areas, and also a lot of information of the villages who exist there, and a planning proposal how to plan this area. The members of the leadership, the Bedouin leadership, this is an heroic step for them, because it's, as I said, there's many conflict, and this is it's a really, like they said, this is what we want. This is an alternative, what we want. This is how we want us to plan. It's a base for negotiation. And they sent these documents that we made together to members of the authority, to Yair Lapid, the Ministry of Exterior, in Foreign
Affairs.
Yes, to Mansour Abbas, many members of the authority and the decision makers. But then came the JNF planting in January and actually stopped this process. It collapsed all the little trust that started to be built in these 7 months which we had a new government. It collapsed everything. But these days it's starting. We can see seeds of it coming back, and I'll talk to it later.
Thank you, Dafna. There's like a theme, I think, underrunning both of the personal stories and professional work of Gadi and Dafna, which is in their personal lives and in their professional lives, they decided to see what wasn't being seen but was right in front of their faces. There's a common thread here throughout all of this about building trust. So, Gadi, I think that's a really great departure point about building trust between people who have suffered the worst. Can you tell us some stories of what your work looks like?
Sure. I just want to mention before I'll tell you a few stories that beside our solidarity visit, we also have a very strong education section, works with religious teachers and Arab teachers, and sometimes mix them together. They didn't let us do it formally through the beginning, through Ministry of Education, the religious sector, so we bypassed them, and now they all coming to us. We also have 3 chapter students, but let's see a few stories that will, and then it's important to see those pictures. I brought them especially, and because you can see here, this is a typical price tag attack on a mosque, not far from Jerusalem. Okay, so you can see here a burned mosque. Now again, price tag is a revenge. It's tag mechir. You pay the price for something that you did to us or government did to us. Innocent Palestinian. So we count the number of mosques and monasteries and churches that were burned, destroyed, damaged since December 2009. The first time that we heard about the term price tag was December 2009. They burned a mosque in a village called Yasuf in Samaria, and they wrote Tag Mechir, price tag. So here also they wrote Taf Mem. Taf Mem is Tag Mechir, initials, price tag. In the left side they wrote Nekama, revenge, and in the middle they wrote Rotzim Geulat Zion. We want Geulat Zion. This is a name of unlegal settlement. The government decided to knock down this unlegal settlement, so you pay the price. You innocent Palestinian, you will pay the price for that decision. So this is just an example of what price tag means. Another example is, this is another mosque inside Jerusalem. Okay, you can see the black wall. It was completely burned. Now someone wrote, "Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," on, okay? Not they, not the evil people. When we came with like 100 people on Saturday night for our solidarity visit with the people in the mosque, so someone wrote, "Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha." Okay, so now, how can you take a horrible, sad story and try to turn it into a little bit better situation? This is the story about the Abu Khdir family. I'm not sure how many of you remember the 15 and a half years old that was kidnapped in East Jerusalem, neighborhood called Shuafat. That was just right after the 3 Jewish boys were kidnapped and murdered. By the way, I know that Naftali Frankel is one of those 3 boys. We know that his grandparents, they live in Rehovot. Shaula Frankel was a teacher in one of the schools that we started, English teacher. The grandfather is a brilliant, famous mathematician. So they kidnapped the 15 and a half boys, pour gasoline on him, burn him, and threw him in the middle of the forest, Jerusalem forest. Horrible, just horrible. Now, Muslims sit only 3 days, not 7 days. We came to pay a 3 days visit, like a Shiva visit. We came with 5 buses, 300 people. They told us, don't go. The police, dangerous, but it's Jerusalem, it's Shuafat. You can go. They cannot just tell you not to go. Of of course, we talked with the family. And it wasn't hard for them to let us, to accept us. But after they understood that we are not a government, this is not a government message, we are just civilian, pure people that want to come to say, we are sorry, we feel shame, hundreds of thousands of people behind us. So we came with 5 buses, walked to the house, nothing happened to us. They talk, we talk, they talk, we talk. This is the women's section. Okay? Now I'll show you another picture. That this picture, by the way, this is the mother here. This is the mother. This is the mother of Muhammad. Now this picture is in their house, the Abu Khdir house, last Hanukkah. So that happened to 2015, and here this is 2000 December. Anyway, last December, last Hanukkah. I don't know if it was December 21. Anyway, we came with safganiyot, with donuts. And they came with oranges from Yericho. And this is the father of Muhammad Abu Khdir, and this is the mother. And this is the Tag Meir group. And they became our good friends. And they know that not all Jews are like the people that kidnapped their son. They are not part of the Zionist movement. They don't have Israeli flags in the room, but they don't hate all Jews, and they know that many of us, including you, support them. Another story.
You want to do one more?
Yeah, one more and then no more.
We could go all day. We could go all day.
I know. But this is an important picture. This man is Yaqub Arabi. Yaqub Arabi. He used to work as a constructor in an ultra-Orthodox village named El-Ad. The people there called him Rabbi Yaakov. Yaqub Arabi, Rabbi Yaakov. He used to give money to poor people in town every week. He was a real tzaddik. Now he drove with his wife, Aisha, on October 2018, on Friday night, Shabbat, okay, with his wife Aisha and their daughter Rama, from Bethlehem, which is not far from Jerusalem, north to the village Bidya, not far from Shechem, from Nablus. Exactly from here, 10 Jewish boys from a yeshiva not far from settlement called Rechelim, after their service in the synagogue, after the Shabbos meal, they went to this place. I'm not sure if you can see it from there, but there is a road here, and this place control the road. You can throw stones to the road, and this is exactly what they did. They threw stones in Shabbat, which is illegal, halachically. Forget about killing people. They threw stones, and one stone hit the head of Aisha, and she died on the spot. Yaakov continued driving with Rama in his car, immediately to a hospital. Of course, we came with olive tree This is what we are doing, to visit him in Bidya. And when Rama, the 9.5 years old, find out that this is a tree for her mother, to memorize her mother, she grabbed the olive tree, ran to their garden, and dig a big hole and plant the tree. The tree is still there. Now it's a big tree. Yaakov Arabi became our good friend. And he is now, not only that he's part of Tag Meir, he is going in Israel from high school to high school, tell his story, and mention Tag Meir. Okay, back to you.
Again, we've seen, boy, I'm moved every time I hear those stories. And this is possibly the 5th time I've heard them, and they are so powerful every time. You see at the depth of their work, there's about seeing people who are typically unseen by Israeli society, and building trust, and how trust underlies so many pieces of this. And we're at an interesting juncture at the moment where that trust, like I said at the beginning, has been translated from the grassroots level into something in the political arena. So we're in year one of this new, very fragile coalition. If you're following the news, I feel like as I ask this question, someone in the audience is going to say, "Oh, it fell. Here's the Haaretz alert. It's done." But we're really curious to learn how this government has impacted your work. Gadi, on the one hand, this government demonstrates that it's possible for Jewish and Arab citizens to share power. On the other hand, extremists still seem to have free reign. And if anything, price tag attacks have increased. Settler violence has increased in the past year. What has been the impact of this government on the work that Tag Meir is trying to do?
Look, Israel is, there is a fight over Israel. How Israel will look like. Are we going to be democracy or theocracy? Are we going to be democracy, Jewish democracy, or controlled by people like Ben Gvir, Smotrich, and even Netanyahu? Ben Gvir, by the way, he's part of the Kahana movement. He used to the picture of Baruch Goldstein that murdered 29 innocent Muslims in Hebron in 1994, and wounded 125 was in his living room, and he's a Knesset member. And if by a chance this government, that this is a unique government, very special one, but if they will collapse, there is a good chance that Ben Gvir will be a minister. And when I really, it is scary, but the other guy, Smotrich, is not so different. You need a very special microscope to see the difference between those two figures. And Netanyahu supports them. Unfortunately, this government, because it's right-wing, central, and Arabs, they try to work together, and people like Dafna and me, sometimes we have to remember that it's hard. Everyone wants to show that he's good for his supporters. And it's very hard to run this kind of government. But the alternative is horrible. And this is a real struggle on how Israel will look like. And New Israel Fund here play a major role, and all NGOs, and there are many of them, are crucially important in this struggle. Another thing that I want to mention, important thing, that people asked us, what are you talking about Jewish terror? How can you compare Jewish terror to Muslim terror? Muslim terror are all over, and they kill families, and they can destroy buildings. And Jewish terrorists, you can count in one hand, no comparison. The answer for that is, I started with Yitzhak Rabin. He was murdered by Jewish terrorists. In the 80s, we had Jewish underground, that seriously wanted to get rid of one of the mosques on Temple Mount. Now, can you imagine that Israel would start to fight against 1.6 or 7 billion Muslims, including small countries like Indonesia? Can you imagine? This is the end of the country, of the Jewish country. And אין לנו ארץ אחרת. We don't have another Jewish country. So that's why they are so dangerous. Forget about values and tikkun olam and chesed and Jewish state. If they will succeed only once, I mentioned 66 churches, monasteries, and they just need to put their hand on one of the mosques on Temple Mount, and we are in a big trouble.
Which underscores how important it is, the work that you're doing, pushing back on that there are at least some, if not many, if not the most, of Israelis or Jewish Israelis don't, that they reject that kind of extremism. And the importance of making sure that Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich are not represented, don't get to officially represent Israel in any way. But of course, back in May, we saw that part of the tit-for-tat escalation in Jerusalem, in the neighborhoods, was, Itamar Ben-Gvir's pop-up office. He put up a tent. He called it his ministerial, his Knesset office, deliberately to poke an eye in the residents of the neighborhood, and that played a part in the escalation that resulted in rockets from the sky. You talk about the power of small people, the power of a small group of people to have a big impact. There are good guys and bad guys here, and I think we're just really proud to have you on our stage as one of the good guys. When it comes to the government, Dafna, what has it meant for your issue? Has your work changed to have a Palestinian party in the government? Is that good? Is it bad? What's the realistic limits of a partner in the political arena?
So I think it's a complex question, because on one hand there is hope, but on the other hand there's a lot of I'm talking about in the Negev, okay? What I see, what I feel in my work, the people I meet. So on one hand, as I mentioned before, there is hope, but on the other hand, there's a lot of disappointment. On one hand, there's very good decisions, and I'll talk about them in a few seconds, that were made in the last year. But on the other hand, there are very bad decisions and harmful decisions which are promoted by the right-wing parties in this government, like Ayelet Shaked, if you heard about it. So I think it's something that you can test, not in a short time, like a year, but in a long run. But let's focus on the good decisions that were made. First of all, like I mentioned, 4 new Bedouin villages were recognized. Okay, this was processes that started decades before. We were involved in it in 2010, 2014 with Rachamen, all of these villages. But Ra'am, as an Arab party in the government, had a very significant role in pushing them forward, okay? Another significant decision that were made was in the policy enforcement policy. I didn't know if I mentioned it, but the Bedouin live with a constant threat of demolition and evacuation, and this is maybe the hardest thing of all. I didn't mention it, but this is the hardest thing of all, because the government policy through all the years is really to displace them and move them to the recognized villages and townships. So there's a very positive progress in the enforcement policy, which allows now young people to have an additional 70 square meters of, they can build another 70 square meters next to their parents' residence. So you remember I told you
you can build an addition to your home.
Okay, so this is another thing. Another good decision is a very significant plan which was assured the socio-economical development for the Negev in a sum of 5.2 billion shekels with a very large scope of looking on the reality. There's budget for the unrecognized villages for the first time. This is something that Ram pushed. But I think besides these good decisions, there's also a change of atmosphere, and this is not less important. First of all, after many, many years of neglect and discrimination that the Bedouin suffered from the state, there's a very, very big sense of alienation and loss of trust. I talked about it. But all the way, the Bedouin always wanted to belong to this country. Although they wanted to belong to the country, to the Israel society, to the political community, and I think Ram, as a key coalition, brought back this sense of belonging. The other thing which we feel is that sense of hope. And hope is, hope is important by itself. A sense of, like I talked about it, a new horizon opened a year ago. There was really a feeling that this is an opportunity to promote issues concerning to Bedouin. First of all, promoting the recognition of villages in the Beersheba Valley, this area I talked about. And the third thing is also a change in the atmosphere. Is that for the first time, the Bedouin issues are really, are part of the not agenda. You hear about them. You open the news and you suddenly hear about recognized villages, about the poor situation in the unrecognized villages, the JNF planting. This happened, the same plantings happened in 2019, just in the beginning of the COVID in Israel. The same JNF workers came inside another village next by, but then we didn't have this Ra'am in the government. So this is another important thing that happened. I mean, the majority of Israel, who couldn't care less about what happened in the Negev to the Bedouin, suddenly hears about issues concerning them, which it's in the middle of the political discourse, the media. So I think there is significant things that happen. I want to just mention that 75% of the Bedouins in the Negev voted for Ra'am, this Arab party. 75%. So Mansour Abbas, the head of Ra'am, is really, has to bring his successes, because the Bedouin people are really pinning their hopes on him. So he's taking the issues very seriously, and I know that he goes and studies the situation and goes to visit the different communities. He has to. But I also it's important to say that we in Bimkom, we're not a political organization, Bimkom, in the sense that we are involved in politics. We have a goal of, changing the political power to more democracy, more human right planning, but we're not a political organization. But our work serves the politicians. Remember, I told you about this document, which was this is something that Mansour Abbas used it to understand more about the Negev, because he's from the north. The issues of the north are more part of him. The Negev is not. So our work serves, from bottom to top, and also we bring the issues from top to bottom. And working with a professional level like we do, sometimes, you go with processes that you can't stop them. You just can't stop them. I mean, the political situation in Israel has ups and downs and many phases, and many especially the past 2 years. But we know that we believe that our work in the professional level will, in some way, you can't stop them. Like you see, the recognition of the villages is a result of the professional work of us, and of course the struggle of the people. This is the first thing. So I think this is it's been a very complex year, but it's somewhere in the middle, I think, the answer.
At this point, let's take some questions from the audience. What I would like to do is take 2 or 3 at a time. And if we're lucky, we'll be able to do a couple rounds of this. So we have 1 question over here. I see 2. Okay, so we'll end 3. So Linda, will you go ahead and... no, I'd like to keep control of the microphone. We accept questions and not shorter statements disguised as questions. Just to be clear. So, Linda, I may tell us your question, and if I need to, I'll repeat it. We'll see who the question really goes to.
This is that I know that the work that Bimkom is doing in the Negev with the community is really important, but I know that Bimkom also works in other parts of the country, and I'd love to know, just briefly, if you can maybe touch on some of the other things that your organization is doing in other parts of the country.
Great. Okay, let's take a group at once. Okay, so Lawrence, did I see you also?
Palestinian and Bedouin activist counterparts to your work are involved with you in your efforts. And if hear what you're doing, I'd like to hear what the Palestinian counterparts are doing. Have that kind of activism on their part.
Palestinian organization.
I mean,
Individuals like yourself or like your organization, are you working hand in hand with them? Are there activists from the Bedouin community working with you?
Okay.
and I saw another hand over here.
Yeah, my first statement.
Oh, Erwin, hi.
What I heard about the JNF situation, that means I should stop supporting them now? My question is, talking to a Canadian audience, what percentage of Israelis are supporting New Israel Fund these days? Since they do have the capacity, do they understand what you're doing?
Great question. Also an area of significant change. Any other questions? Okay, yes.
I have a small question. Bedouin in the past were herders. They followed the herds around to where the water was and where the grass was. Have they changed what they're doing these days? So if you created villages with the men or whoever does the herding, they'll still be able to do what they do? A very specific question.
Okay, so that was several for you, but I'll ask you to be concise if you can.
Yeah. So, in your question, I'll give one or two examples. In Walaje, you heard about the Palestinian village in Walaje, which half of it is in the Jerusalem municipality, half of it is in the area A, which is controlled by the Palestinian government. The part which has in the Jerusalem municipality actually doesn't have a plan because the state doesn't want Walaje to develop. So lately there were 50 houses which had under demolition orders, 50. And we were involved with a legal procedure, gave the planning perspective of how can you plan this Walaje, how can you plan these houses and give them approval plans. And actually just 3 weeks ago, We managed to stop the demolition order for a few months, but we believe it will stop it because they started thinking about proper planning in Walaje. So this is one example, which was very. We were working on it very. So in East Jerusalem, we work recently in many demolition of houses in Palestinian neighborhoods because the plans really don't meet the needs, like I said. In the north, we're working with a community that the state declared on an area nature preserve on lands which are actually agricultural lands of Palestinians. I mean, there are no buildings there. They grow it's a cultivated land, but the state declared it as a nature preserve, so they have to go out from there, and it's their private land. So this. We submitted a petition together with another legal, Adala, if you heard about it. It's a Palestinian. We work together with them a lot, actually in everything with Adala. This is maybe, and also in this there's a little success because the state didn't answer to our petition yet, but the two sides, us with the residents, the Palestinian, and the Nature Society, I don't know how to call it in English, Ratag, started to sit together and negotiate it and understand that maybe the people can continue with their agricultural land even though it's a nature preserve. So these are the kind, we have much more spaces where Bimkom works, but this is a few of them. I mentioned that all our work, we work with the communities, with the leadership of the communities. It means the local communities. Every village, recognized village and unrecognized village, has a local community council. Sometimes it's more active, sometimes less, but we always work with them, okay? Our Palestinian Bedouin organization in the Negev, there are many. Each of them have a different field which it works with. Adala is more legally, so we submit our, we do the legal procedures together with them because we're planners and they're lawyers. So we're involved with them with many cases of communities which are in a threat of evacuation. And also with this, recently the state submitted a plan to enlarge and upgrade a train railroad, and actually it's on from Beersheba to Dimona. 60,000 people live in this along this railroad. There was no station planned for these 60,000 Bedouins who live along this railroad train. There's an example here. So we submitted an objection. In Israel, you can submit objections 60 days to plans together with Adala. There's also women organizations which we work with. I can say that it's always kind of a partnership together. We never work by ourselves, Bimkom. We are the planning organization in the Negev, the most, the profession, but we always work with women organizations or Bedouin organizations, which there is several. About the nomad you say? Nomad. Okay, there's still it's a very agriculture society. Every Bedouin, even if it's the villages which are more modern, have 4, 5, 10 sheep and chickens. They're very agriculture. Most of them have lands which they grow their crops. But the state, actually, during the years, the state didn't give them water. Cheap water Yes, so they stopped. I mean, they now grow only wheat and all kinds of plots you say, that don't need, that can, from the little rain that there is in the Negev, because the state doesn't give them. It's all a matter of, blocking their development. Also, the sheeps, they have, many of them have many sheeps. I mean, many, thousands. But Israeli don't give them the ability to go with their sheeps and Yeah, to more fertile lands. So it gets more and more restricted. But if they could have, they would continue with it. But they live in houses, and they want houses like you and me, and maybe on more, like a moshav. I don't know if you know that, but they need their space. They live in big families. Husband has several wives, unfortunately, but this is also something that is you see less and less of it. But the father of the family lives with his wives and the families in a very enclosed. And this is the way they still are living. Not in the townships. In Rahat, there it's different, but you don't see in the villages, they don't live in stories. They want to remain in agriculture, traditional families. But this is changing all the time. It's just long-term processes, which the state has to understand this. You can't do it from one day to another. You can't make changes.
Erwin, you asked, who should you be supporting? And I think really the question is, do you know where your money goes and do you know what it's doing? I said that, JNF Canada and JNF US and whatever, they're responsive to their donors. Are they being transparent with where their money is going? What projects are they funding? Like I said, a lot of that is hard to discern by looking at their public websites. But they are responsive and they do know it's an issue. And so I think, the best thing you can do is to take it up with them. Our belief is that Israel is our belief at the New Israel Fund is that Israel is in desperate need of strengthening its progressive civil society sector. Our mode of being is to fund groups of organizations who work on the same issues. Adala is funded by New Israel Fund. Bimkom is funded by New Israel Fund. Our work is to give them money, but it's also to give them capacity building, to train them to do their work better, to support them in the ways outside of just the funds that they need in order to be better. And sometimes it means helping just get them around the table to talk about the issues. One of the things that we're funding at the moment that is the result of the money that we raised in Canada with the Shared Society Emergency Fund is the round table around which all of the major Jewish Arab organizations in Israel sit. It was activated at the time last May. It is comprised of lots of the groups that you have that you already know and hear of, like Hand in Hand and Tag Meir and Bimkom and others. But that these organizations, usually they are co-directed by a Jewish and an Arab director, and they are co-led by joint staff and boards and things. And to gather together in order to magnify the response, specifically in the moment where that was the worst time, where they really saw they have to speak up in order to tell another tale about what is happening in Israeli society. And now what we do is we do opinion polls, like what is it that Israelis can get behind when it comes to Jewish and Arab joint government and share and living in Israel, and how do we get that information to the organizations doing the work in order to do their work stronger. Marriage equality was a framework developed because that's what moved the needle on LGBTQ issues, especially around same-sex marriages. So that is the work that we do, and that we hope that you see that by giving to the New Israel Fund, you are supporting not just Dafna and not just Gadi, but all of the work of all of these organizations, potentially 100 a year, if not more, that are doing human and civil rights, democracy itself, working with Palestinian citizens, religious freedom, social and economic equality, and shared society like we've been talking about today. So I would love to do more Q&A, but I want to ask Gadi. I just want to ask you one last question, because to end on a little bit of a hopeful note. How do you know that your work is working? Because we've heard from Dafna some ways that the planning policy really is changing, but I want, if we can. How do you know your work is working? And then I'd like to invite Laurent Sparchichet, our development officer, to close out our afternoon.
Okay. I just want you to know that we don't just come and visit people and say hello and goodbye. This is a long-term obligation. And we raise money for people like I mentioned before. Sometimes they need support, not just moral support. They need money. So we raised for the Wapsha family 350,000 shekalim. And it came from Israeli citizens, Jewish and Arabs. Just recently we raised 200,000 shekalim for another poor Palestinian that were severely hurt in a Jewish terror attack. And among those people who give us the money, many of them are Arabs. And this is a great achievement that Jews, Muslim, Christians working together for solidarity purposes. This is also kind of success. This is our response to the marching in Jerusalem Day with the flags. 60,000 young people from religious Zionist sector, extreme, are marching every year from West Jerusalem to the Western Wall with Israeli flags, enter the Muslim quarter with hate songs, horrible songs. Not all of them, but you don't need all of them. You just need 20% of them. And then they use the sticks of the flags to hit the doors of the stores. You have to know that up above those stores live families with children. We talk with these families, and they keep telling us that after this marching, their children suffer, some of them for many, many weeks after this marching. So this is our alternative. 8 years ago, we started to spread flowers in all Jerusalem. We started with 20, 30 volunteers and a few hundred, and last time, just months ago, we did it we spread almost 3,000 flowers with 250 volunteers. Hopefully next year it will be bigger, and if we will be like 1,000 and 10,000 flowers, then the other marching will have trouble simply physically to march. But we need both people from West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem to march in this flower parade, and that gives us a lot of hope. So this is a success.
I forgot to answer Erwin's question. The short answer is 1 of every 4 donors around the world to New Israel Fund is an Israeli. And you can come up to me afterwards and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. This is the conclusion of our formal program. Laurence, would you please come up and conclude our evening?
Okay. I think everyone can hear me without the... Yeah, okay. Okay, sorry about that. I think this is the first time somebody tells me I'm not loud enough. Gadi and Dafna, thank you so much for speaking with us today. I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone here now when I say that I feel deeply motivated by your commitment to Israel and inspired by your work. You both managed to vividly share a hard reality while keeping us hopeful, a very hard feat. My name is Laurence Barshisha, and I'm the Development Officer here at the New Israel Fund of Canada. I really believe in NIFC and in our work, and for a very personal reason, personal reasons, which I would love to share with you today. I was born and raised in Montreal, home of Canada's most conservative Jewish community. I was raised, like so many members of our community, a staunch Zionist. My grandparents of blessed memory attempted to immigrate from Morocco to mandate Palestine in 1941. Unfortunately, they were caught by the Brits, spent a year in the concentration camps in Cyprus, and escaped and tried again in 1942, this time successfully, and ended up in Haifa. My life was full of stories of my mother, my aunts, and my uncles settling Israel, and I never stopped to second guess it. Stories of my mother spending the 6-day war in a bunker, both arms broken, terrified and in pain. Tales of daily struggles, but always underlined with pride. Pride to have been there, proud to be an Israeli settler. I never questioned our attachment to Israel. This land is our birthright as Jews. In CEGEP, I finally met a few people who were not Jewish, and I learned about some of the things the Israeli government was doing that troubled me and left me unsettled. I was always too scared to pipe up during our family gatherings, afraid to be attacked by the people that I love the most, terrified to ask questions or wonder about different perspectives. It all came to a head one Shabbat lunch. Our table was huge, 20 characters all around me, loud, hungry, and opinionated. Typical Moroccans. My uncle related a story about our grandfather. A fifth baby had just been born, Hashana, which means the year, in 1948, the year of the creation of the State of Israel. My grandfather went to the city councilor and asked for a home with more space. The city councilor told my papi, meet me at this address, apartment 804. The next day, they met there, accompanied with a locksmith. My uncle laughed, saying the Palestinians had just ran away, leaving everything intact, and my family was able to move right into that apartment. I can't really explain what happened next. I stood up. I said, are we really laughing that our presence in a city was so terrifying that a whole family fled, abandoning everything they had? Can we please realize that this isn't normal? Can we recognize that mistakes have been made? My hands were shaking, my face was burning and red. Had I just made a huge mistake? The whole Shabbat table went dead silent. Was Laurence pro-Palestinian? A flurry of conversations broke out. I shared some data that I had collected in my research about the conflict, stuttering the whole time. I don't think I changed anyone's mind that day, but for me, I knew that I needed to participate in making things better for everyone in the region. I'm sure everyone here also has an incredibly similar story. I'm sure we've all had these moments in near and dear relationships where we've had to declare your progressive intentions to other more hardliners on Israel, and hear family or friends decry us as a traitor. You've possibly had to admit to supporting Jewish life in the Middle East in social justice circle, or been accosted by a well-meaning warrior who tells you, just letting you know, I support Palestinians, when you reference your Judaism in a non-political setting. That's why I was so pleased to find NIFC when I moved to Toronto, and was even happier to be employed here a year later. For me, and for many of you it already is, NIFC became my ideological home. Here you can be completely yourself. You can support the dream of a Jewish homeland without giving up your values of justice, equality, and democracy. You can learn the truth, what Israel is doing right, and where it needs our help the most. I'd love to talk to you about getting a bit more involved. The absolute best way to learn more about our work in Israel is to see it for yourself on our upcoming study tour. If you think today was inspiring, imagine having this conversation with Dafna in an actual Bedouin village. Imagine visiting Jerusalem with Gadi and seeing the positivity that stems from his work. On September 12th, come spend 8 days with NIFC in Israel. Be inspired by the relentless work of the activists you support. See and understand the impact of their work, and watch Israel's future, a better, more equitable future, creating itself before your very eyes. You'll be experiencing the occupation for yourself and meet the people who are tirelessly working to end it. We'll be seeing centuries of geopolitical histories unfolding before us during our tour of the Old City, walking the beige limestone from Damascus Gate to Sheikh Jarrah. We'll visit the Knesset, meet with sitting members, and learn about the new opportunities and new challenges brought on by Israel's historic new government. We'll be touring the West Bank with Breaking the Silence, seeing the impact of the settlements and the violence that stems from them. Through this study tour, you'll be exposed to the realities Israelis and Palestinians live through every day. You'll learn how marginalized groups like the LGBTQ or African asylum seekers are working together to create a better tomorrow. I'm happy to answer any of your questions about the study tour. Our early bird discount ends today, but I'm sure we can figure something out. I know a few people in the organization. This postcard, which some of you may already be sitting on, or they are other places in this event space, has all the information with the URL to get the itinerary and also my contact information should you have more questions. So thank you again, Gadi, Dafna, and Ben. And to our Toronto leadership, Linda, Tema, Esther, our advisory council, John and Ephraim, and our members of our campaign cabinet, Isser and Naomi. Thank you so much for being here today. And thanks to you, our dear guests, for coming out here, for learning more about the situation in Israel, and for supporting the work of the New Israel Fund of Canada as we, together, fight for democracy and equality. We're very excited that this is our first event in Toronto post-pandemic, so we'll be sticking around a few more minutes, and please come say hi if you are so inclined. Have a great rest of your Sunday. Happy Father's Day.